Hello everyone, very good evening. So welcome back to the AZ900 Fundamentals Cloud Festival. So we had a great discussion on tomorrow on last day, that's on yesterday about an AZ900. So we have discussed completely about the module one. So even much more the topics from the module one. So today let's continue our discussion with respect to the module two. Yeah. So today we are discussing about an Azure architecture and the services. So it's completely like it's going to carry like 35 to 40% of your weightage, the questions from the AZ900 fundamentals. So this Azure architecture and the services is going to cover a lot of topics over them. Just a minute. So in this one today, we are going to discuss an core architectural concepts of Azure. So this is like looks very important. So most of the concepts that we are going to discuss and very important concepts from the architecture and the services perspective. So before discussing this yesterday, just let me give an review. So what all that we have discussed during an yesterday discussion. So as an introduction of the course, so we have discussed an as like an what is an cloud computing. So at the very initial, so what the cloud computing consists of, and we have tried to understand what is actually the cloud, and then we have went on, we are try to understand the cloud computing complete concept so in detail. So and then we try to understand in detail about the shared responsibility model. So in the shared responsibility model, we have tried to understand the responsibilities. So the responsibilities from the what is like an on-premises, what kind of responsibilities will be there on the on-premises, and what are all the responsibilities will come up if it is you're going to make use of a virtual machine, and the responsibilities that will come up if it is an application, and if it is a software as a service, that is a SaaS. So then we have looked into the responsibility complete model. So in each, it could be a platform as a service, software as a service, or infrastructure as a service, what all the responsibilities could be gained. So after the responsibility model understanding, we discussed in public cloud, that is the cloud models like in public cloud, private cloud, and the hybrid cloud. So we had a good understanding about the cloud models, and then we understand like an use cases for each cloud model, that is then public, private, and the hybrid. So going forward, we understood the very much important concept of the consumption-based model, that is the CapEx and the OpEx, that is the capital expenditure and the operating expenditure. So we understood in detail what is an capital expenditure, what are all the things will come up over there. So which is going to be initially as a investment, and if it is a maintenance perspective, operating expenditure. So what are all the things will come up if it is an on-premises, and if it is a software service, if it is a cloud-based, which one will be the preferred one. So going ahead, we understood the pricing model. So which are the services could be free of cost, so free services, and we understood pay basis upon different metrics. So it could be like an pay based upon the time, pay per GB, pay for operation, and then so it's like an pay based upon the executions, and so many other metrics based upon all that charges will be applied. So we have understood in detail of that. So even yesterday we discussed in detail about the benefits, so which is very much important concept. So in the module one, so benefits of the using the cloud services. So compared to an on-premises, what are all the major benefits that you will come across, that you will look into it if you are making use of a cloud service, that is like an availability, high availability, scalability. In within scalability, it could be like an vertical scaling, horizontal scaling, and reliability and the predictability. Even the like an in the security and the governance perspective, also we have discussed as well as manageability, agility, elasticity. So different concepts we have discussed as well. So the cloud among the last subtopic in the module one, so it's an cloud service types. So cloud service type is like very much interesting one. So it's a infrastructure as a service. We try to understand what is an infrastructure as a service. So what will be there in the infrastructure as a service with an examples like an virtual machine, load balancer, application gateway, virtual network, so much more we have discussed in the infrastructure as a service. And then we discussed much more about the platform as a service. We understood what is actually platform. So how much that we will be having an access, what we will do in the platform. So it's like an complete control over the hardware and generally where we upload our code and we will configure the environment and so much more that you used to do. So as a platform is a service examples that we are looked into is application service, web applications, SQL database and all. So even going forward, we discussed then software as a service as well. So that is the SaaS. So in the SaaS, we discussed about much more what is an SaaS and some of the examples of the SaaS like an Azure portal and Outlook 365, Windows Virtual Desktop, Azure DevOps, all those things we have discussed. And as a last topic, so like an serverless, even we try to understand in detail what is on server and what is on serverless, why it is called as a serverless. So these are the different cloud service types we have discussed in detail on during our last class. So today we are going to with an module 2, that is an Azure architecture and services. So in the Azure architecture and services, let's look into the topics that we are going to cover today. So it's like first the part is like, and we are going to in detail about the global infrastructure, how this Azure will be infrastructure will be maintained globally. So how can I host my database or the server in some other part of the global or as another country? And how can I keep a backup of my database? So what is the architecture maintained for that in the Azure? So we are going to try to understand that. And then we are going to understand about the Azure compute and the network services. So in the compute and the network services, we are going to understand about like an virtual machine options and including the like an scale sets, availability sets, and the virtual desktops. These are so much of interesting concepts here. And we are going to discuss about an web application features and application services, container, what is a container, what is why the Kubernetes will come. So it looks like a DevOps concept, right? So we are trying to understand what is the why the DevOps will come up here. So what actually the Azure is supporting the perspective of DevOps. That was we are trying to understand. And Azure Virtual Desktop, all the concepts we are going to understand in detail. So in the storage services, yes, very much important. So if we have a data, so we need to store those, and then we need to run the analytics, then we need to bring in the insights. For everything, data is much more important. So giving the first preference on the data, so we are like and trying to understand what are the different kinds of an Azure storage services are there, and the different tiers of the Azure storage options are there, and also a lot of different options for the moving files and migration options if it is like an if you are to migrate from the on premises to the cloud or as the vice versa, so different way it's in a hybrid manner. So all that we are going to understand in the storage service. So and then in this last subtopic we want to understand, we are going to understand about an Azure identity. So it's like an everyone have the unique identity. So for example, if you are accessing an Gmail, so you will be having an unique user ID. So in the same way, so there will be a unique identification. It could be an email address. So the email address at the rate, if it is on Gmail, so at the rate gmail.com. So if it is at the rate gmail.com, so whatever the front, so a front one will be like an unique email address, unique email ID. So the same goes there. So how the in the Azure the unique identification will be under, so that which will come, which we're going to discuss much more about in the concept as like an Azure Active Directory. So that is called as like an AAD in the Azure. And even much more concepts related to the access, that is we call like an two things there, authentication and the authorization. We are going to understand about and what is authentication and what is authorization, the difference. Also we are going to understand in detail, and the security aspects. So cool. Let's kickstart with the first subtopic, and let's understand in depth. The first subtopic is in core Azure architecture. So in the core Azure architecture and the components. So the very first thing is like a region. So there's a concept called as like a region. So let's try to understand what is a region, and there is like an lot of sub regions will be there, zones will be there, region pairs will be there. Let's try to understand. So region means in the Azure, it is like a set of or like a related or interconnected data centers. So which are like no more than few miles apart. So you must select a region. For example, if it is like an APAC region or else US region, or else like an US North US region, or else like you can go with an Europe region, UK region, so Africa region. So you can choose the different regions. So where these all interconnected data centers. So which are no more than like a few miles apart. So you must like can select the region when creating most Azure services. So there are like currently 60 plus. So 60 plus active and like a planned worldwide. So all over the worldwide, there are like a 60 plus active and the planned regions are there. So the concept is like, so the data center. So region means the data center you need to first choose. For example, if you are going to start with the basic project or else like in basics accessing the resource from the Azure, it could be like creating a database first. So you want to create a database and you want to make sure that which region that you want to prefer. So based upon the region, you will get like an access bit faster way, and which one will be very and even based upon the region, the pricing will also differ. If a region is most of the customers are preferred is a preferred one, so the cost will also be very high. So if the region is like in West preferred, the cost will be less. So the pricing will differ based upon the region, and also it is completely like an of which one is most closest for you to for your business. So if you are sitting remotely in India, or else you can if you are handling the business in a US, you can choose the region, the data center sitting in a US region. So it's like an around 60 plus active regions are there. So where the data centers have been maintained all over the world. So most of like in any cloud computing provider, so can cover the whole global perspective. So we'll not have like an access to all the 54 because of some restricted over there. So let's look into that in detail. So you can see in this diagram, so here you can see there are like a multiple regions, as I mentioned, 60 plus regions. So the blue dots, wherever you are seeing the blue dots, so those blue dots are the regions of your Azure. So you can, if you want to create a data center, you can go ahead and you can create a data center for that region. So it's like an as I told you, it's a region is a set of data centers, so deployed with an latency defined perimeter and connected through a dedicated regional low latency network. So because every customer prefers an high speed connectivity, and with more global region than any other cloud provider, Azure gives the customers the flexibility to deploy applications when they are needed. And Azure region is like describe the pricing and the service availability over there. So here you can, if you are running a business in an US, so you can choose like an US like an any of the regions over here, multiple regions you can see here. And if you are like in North in Canada, and also you can choose like in Canada Central, Canada East, Canada, or as if you are in the west of the US, or as like an east of the US, you can base it upon the preference you can choose. Or else if you're running a business in an India. So in India also there are like an Azure regions are there, like in South India, Central India, West India. So multiple different regions will be there. So based upon your preference, you can choose the regions. And there is a concept called as like an region pair. So region pair is completely is like an each region is paired with one other region. So let me come back here. So you can see here each region. So there are multiple regions are there, right? So every time, so the region, so each region is paired with one other region. So the reason is which provides the highest speed and also low latency connection between them. So if you it makes sure that the regions are like an nearby, almost nearby. So because the latency has to be very less, and even the data transmission has to be very fast and the speed. So Azure treats actually this pair, that is the region pairs, trying to minimize the chance of both going down at the same time. So it is like an backup. So it's like an good as a place to store the backup, right? So I have like an redundant servers running. For example, you have placed in data. You have chosen as Central India as a region, and you have placed the backup over there. So due to natural calamities, or there could be any reason. So if that region goes down, so Azure will maintain a region pair. So it could be like in West India. So as a region pair. So whatever the data will be stored in a central India, if that goes down, the data center data goes down, so the region pair will be works as a backup. So, and even the closest one, so whatever the region paired will be maintained, so that region pair will be like a very closest one that which will provide the highest speed and the low latency connection. So because if anything, so anyone one of the region goes down, so the other will be trained as like an backup. So if there's a lot of minimize the chance of especially if both the things are going down, both the servers are going down. So it means both the data centers are going down. And now one more thing you need to understand here is on the blue dot, there's like an white one. You can see a star kind of. So that is like an availability zones. So the zones are not everywhere. You can observe over there. So if you look into the US part, so the zones are there only in the West US 2, East US, and the East US 2. So only like an Central US. So only few of the regions are have an availability zones, and the dotted ones is like an completely an announced region, the new regions. So it could be like an Spain Central, or as like an Poland Central, Qatar Central, or as Israel Central. So these are the new Mexico Central, the new announced regions. So we understood why the region pair is required. So which is the very closest one. So which are the two regions with each other. So which have like an high speed and the low latency connection between them. So Azure treats them as a pair. So mainly to trying to minimize the chance of them both are going down at the same time. So this is what so in such case, like, and it's a good place to store the backup, right? So in that case, if multiple regions are good and one region of each pair will be treated as a priority. So as a backup, it will handle the region pairs will be handled. So example of pairs, so there's no need to memorize the pairs and all. So it's like just as an example of them. So for example, if you Canada, so you can choose the closest regions, Canada Central and the Canada East. So if for Europe, North Europe and the West Europe. So US, it's an US, East US and the West US. So for example, the Brazil South and South Central US. So the almost the closest regions will be considered for the region pair. So now the concept is with respect to the sovereign regions. So probably you may have heard, so it's not like every region that you will have an access. So the regions which are like specifically dedicated, so the regions are dedicated to a specific sovereign entities and isolated from the like in rest of the Azure regions. So among that, at present, the two of the regions are completely isolated. So one is the Azure government and US, and the other one is an Azure region. Sorry, Azure China. So the China and the Azure government. So these two are the ones which is completely isolated. So these regions are like an specifically are dedicated for few things. It's not like every you will be having an access for everything. So probably like, and as I told, there are 60 plus regions are there. So it's not mean that you are going to get access to all the regions. So at present, like, and there are two are there previously, the Switzerland or the other one also in the list of sovereign region. So but at present only the Azure government and the China. So only these two things. For to access, what you may think, no, what required to access the Azure government or else the Azure China regions. So if it is like an Azure government, so you need to have an access of as being as an government employee of the US region. So or for the business or else for the very important documents to handle, or rest for the government perspective, it will be used the region only for that. It's like a limited, it's not for the every customers. And if it is in China, so then it is like mainly for the business, those who have in the China region. So if you have a business in a China region, then you can go ahead and you can access and there are some of the policies, rules and regulations are there. If you match, so then you are easy to go and access the China region. Okay, so now let's try to understand what is a zone. So just now I've shown the regions, and also I've shown there is a something called like an zone, right? So let's understand what is actually the zone is, what the zone will provide, Azure availability zone. So let's try to understand. So the region, you can see here, this is a Azure region. In one Azure region, there are like multiple zones are there, availability zones are there. So this is a single Azure region. For example, central US. So it's one of the region. In the central US region, there are multiple like an availability zones are there. So Azure availability zones are like an unique physical locations. So within a specific Azure region. And these zones offer high availability to protect your application as well as data from the data center failures. So if there's any failures, just to avoid that one. And here you can see each zone is made up of one or more data center. So there are like an availability zone 1, availability zone 2, and availability zone 3. So each here in this case, each zone, you can see here, each zone have like an one or more data centers. So availability zone 1. So the zone 1 contain like an one or more data centers. The zone 2 contains separately one or more data centers, and the same with zone 3 as well. So each zone is made up of one or more data centers. It is mainly equipped with, now trying to understand, it's mainly equipped with independent power, cooling, and networking. So you may think of, why do we need independent cooling or as networking? Or as you may think of like an why do we need an power connectivity and all? So if it is an on-premises, so now what the thing is like, so the infrastructure is completely given by someone else. So infrastructure is completely given by the service provider. That is an Azure, or else that could be an it is like an that could be an from the AWS or Google Cloud. Who are providing the infrastructure? They are maintaining the infrastructure. So they are maintaining the servers. So in the data center. So to avoid the failure or as to from the accessing the data, so what they are doing is they are maintaining especially these in a single region. They're maintaining an availability zone at an unique physical locations within a region, and also offering an like a availability, protecting your applications and the data, and whenever the data centers failures within multiple one or more data centers. So the physical separation of availability zones within a region protects applications and data from facility level issue. So facility level means that's what, if the one data center powered something short circuit, or what could be any of the accident happened, and if it goes down, or else if the network goes down of the one of the data center. So any kind of an any physical separate the physical separation, the reason is if there is any kind of an accident happen in one of the data center on the availability zone within a region, this protects your application, your data from the facility level issues. So the zone redundant services replicate your application and data across our Azure availability zones to protect from single point of failure. So it means if you are having a some of the data, the same data will be maintained over the multiple data center. If the availability zone one data goes down, if the availability zone data, if you think of it like and goes down due to some reasons, and or if there is a network issue, or if there could be an electricity issue. So if it goes down completely, nothing to worry. So you will be having an the backup. So the backup from the availability zone 2 or as the availability zone 3. So the data centers will be there. So those data centers will be maintaining completely. So you can nothing to be worried about if one goes down. So regions with availability zone. So if you look into it, so there are like in multiple regions are there in the South America and the Europe. So each with like having an availability zones. It's not mean that every region have an availability zone. So it's not mandatory that every region must and should have an availability zones. So there could be a single zone, or else there could be a multiple zones. So in each zone, there will be like in data centers, one or more data centers. So as we have seen in the diagram, let me show that. Yeah, as we see over here, so you can see availability zones, the West US to Central US. So these have the availability zone. These have multiple zones, and these have an access to like in multiple zones, and the each zone will be having an especially the data centers. So your data will be maintained in multiple zones. If one goes due to the connectivity issue, or as one goes due to the electricity issues, the other will backup will be maintained. Okay, so now we'll try to understand the data center. So just now we try to understand what is an Azure region and what is an availability zones in Azure. So inside a region, multiple zones will be there. Inside a zone, there could be like one or more data centers will be there. So you can see here, one or more, the word. So Azure data centers are unique physically buildings actually. It's completely separated. It's completely and isolated. So located over all over the globe. So that also a group of like an network computer servers. So the Azure it makes sure that, so Microsoft makes sure that the completely separate data centers are being maintained. So it's not like an each other like an one other will be interconnected. The separate internet connectivity will be there. Not the internet service provider will also be the same. The different internet service provider will be there to it will be taken caring completely the for each and every different data centers. So even with respect to the availability zones as well. So each zone, if one zone having three or four, especially the three or four data centers, the availability zone, the next one, it could be availability zone 2 or availability zone 3. So that could also have like in different data centers, multiple data centers. Okay, so now let's try to understand about the resource group. So what is actually the resource group? So we are till now we understood what is an region, what is an zone, and also like and we understood in detail what actually the especially the data centers. So in each and every region there will be like a zone, and in zone there will be a data center. So in the data center what it could be there? So in a data center, so it you can see multiple resources. So for example, once you go ahead and you start a project, so any project it could be. So whenever you start a project, so the project or the basic one, for example, it could be like in building an application, or else like in building a website. So to build a website, you need to make sure that it need a database. So the one of the database, and then you need especially some of the analytics tool. So especially to get the data from the database and to run the analytics. So once you run the analytics, you need to bring out the data as an with an insights. So with the nice graphical representation, and also with a nice UI representation with respect to the analytics, what you are bought. So you need to showcase for your customer, or as the building an application, or as the front end application, mobile application, web application. It could be any of that. So for all that, like a multiple resources will be used. So you will make use of a multiple resources, and those resources, these are the different resources you will choose at the initial of your the very initial of your project. Like when you create, so the Azure will ask you in which data center, or else like in which region, so do you need to create your resources. So once you create the resources, so in a single subscription, that you can go like, and you can take like an hundreds of subscription for the hundreds of resources you can use in one of the big project. So in such case, the thing is like, how can you differentiate? There could be like an multiple projects will be there, 2 or 3 projects. So you can group them. So you can group separately one project which is completely belongs to an, for example, intelligence, or as just as a smart monitoring mining industry. For example, if you're doing one of your customer is a mining industry customer, so you may think like completely the resources which will be used for the mining industry. So all those resources you can group it as a single group. So you can, if you later on, if you don't want all the resources, you can directly go ahead and you can just delete those resources at one shot. So, and if you want to replicate the same kind, so whatever it is there, so you can easily create, you can replicate all the resources, what it is there, the same kind of the things by just by replicating the group, all the resources, 100 resources, you can recreate. So this is what the completely the hierarchy. So consider a project. In one of the project, you can see the 3 resources are there. In one project, there could be only one database. In one project, it could be like an analytics. So the combination based upon the project, the combination or like the mix of all the resources will be called as an resource group. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. So the thing is like here, you can see multiple resources, and there is a subscription, and also there is an concept of like a management of groups. So resources, as I mentioned, so this completely as like in the data center, whatever the multiple resources that you will run. So the basic building blocks. So the basic building blocks of an Azure, it could be a virtual machine, or else it could be a virtual network, or else it could be a database, or else it could be a container. These are the Azure resources. So the resource group is like a folder structure. In a folder, you can contain multiple files which belongs to a single thing, right? The same way, the basic, the folder structure of an Azure in which you organize resource like databases, or else like virtual machines, virtual network, or almost any resource. So you can group them. And the subscription is a like a billing unit. So within the Azure, all resources under a subscription get billed to a single owner. So there will be a single owner. For that single owner, all the resources that have been used. So all the resources under the same resource group, or else like a different resources groups, will be charged, will be billed for the specific owner. So and there's a called and like in subscriptions. So subscription is, that's what the billing unit within the Azure. All the resources will be get billed, will the bill will be generated, and it will be generated for a single owner who has the subscription for all the resources. You may ask, they get a question. So it's like in multiple subscriptions can be done? Yes. So possible to create a multiple subscriptions to separate out the billings as well. So we can create a multiple subscriptions, and so based upon the multiple subscription, the multiple separate billings can also be generated. So, and the very top one is like a management group. So management group, a hierarchy of subscriptions. So this can have many subscriptions, and can group them and can separate out them and put those groups into another group as well. So this is the hierarchy, the management group. The management group is an the topmost. So of the hierarchy can have like in many subscriptions. So we can have an different subscriptions and generate a billing for and separate each of the subscriptions. And the thing is like based upon the subscriptions, so you can make use of an multiple resources. So and you can group those resources in a as a resource group as well. So the next is like an Azure. So we'll discuss in detail about and each of that. So the first is like an Azure subscriptions. So as discussed, subscription of the Azure. So it's like an logical container. So it is like an Azure subscription is completely an logical container. It used to provision related business or technical resources in Azure. It holds the complete details of the technical resources. It holds like an all your resources like a virtual machine, database, and more. When we create an Azure resource like a virtual machine, you will identify the subscription it belongs to. It allows you to delegate access through the role based as well. So we are going to discuss that what is an a role based and what is an authentication out or the authorization things. So based upon the role based, so you will get an access control for mechanism as well. So, and here the subscription is a billing unit. So how many resources that you will use, how many resources that you will generate and utilize for all those resources, the subscription is like a billing unit, the billing will be generated. So multiple subscriptions as you get it, so you can generate the multiple bills as well. So users can access to one or more subscription with different roles. So there could be a multiple projects and the multiple owner of the project. So based upon that multiple project, multiple subscriptions could be done. So for each subscriptions, the separate billings could be made. So all resources consumed by a subscription will be billed to the owner. So as shown, so the management, the first, the top most, all the subscriptions, whatever the multiple different subscriptions, so different billings has been generated. So that will be pointed towards the owner. So whoever will be having a major access as like a super admin. So for them, the billing will be generated. So in also to understand in this subscription part, there are a lot of benefits also over there. Benefits of working with the Microsoft solutions. So even the proactive guidance will be there when you take the subscription, and the maximum support will be provided. And you need to, like, the thing is, like, you need to, whenever you go with a subscription, you can investigate, evaluate, design, and migrate the things. So it will complete the guidance will be provided. So you can investigate the document, your software and the workloads, and you can evaluate, classify the applications and the workloads. And also you can design, that is like, can plan and the destinations for each of your workload, whatever it could be based upon the project. And you can migrate the actual move of the data, or as the service, based upon the platform, or as the software as a service things. So whenever you move towards, so you can migrate the things. So you'll get a lot of supports and, as well in the Azure for that. Okay, so in this diagram, you can see the Microsoft Azure account. So there, as one of the example, here you can see like and different subscriptions will come into picture. So the first one is like an, consider there's this single organization. In an organization, there could be like in separate teams, so different teams will be there. So the first team, it could be an HR. So and the second one, it could be a finance, and the third as in marketing. So all the three are not interrelated. So HR, it could be done, so in a separate way. So they are making use of an Azure, means what are all the tools, what are all the resources, the kind of an database, the kind of an analytics, the kind of an insights. So that they will make is completely different, which has been used by the financial team. So the analytics, or as the documentations, the databases, the tools that has been used by the financial team, even it will be completely different when it's compared from the HR and the marketing as well. So the marketing will also be completely different as compared to HR and finance. So it could be like a service bus, cloud services, Codeplex, and the remote applications, traffic manager. So different tools will be used there. So whenever you have a Microsoft account, so you can create a different subscriptions. So like and multiple subscriptions can be generated under that multiple subscriptions. So you can access the multiple different services that is required based upon the subscription. For example, if you look at here, so the HR Azure subscription is going to have an automation, cloud service, virtual machine, and even SQL data warehouse, traffic manager, and the service fabric. So it's like in different ones, which is compared to like an service which has been subscriptions which has been taken by the finance and the marketing. So the bill will be generated, separate bill will be generated for the complete resources which has been used for the HR Azure subscription. And the similar way, the resources which has been accessed from the finance, and the similar it is like an access from the marketing. From all the resources which has been used, so the final bill or a billing subscription, so is a like a billing unit will be generated for the like a super admin we can call, that's the owner of the Azure account. So next, we'll try to understand what is Azure Management Group. So very interesting topic this is. So if you look at if your organization has like many Azure subscriptions, consider it could be like it can go like an hundreds of subscriptions, different subscriptions. You may need a way, right? So you may need a way to effectively manage access, policies, and also compliance for those subscriptions. So management group provide a governance scope here for the subscriptions. So you organize subscriptions into a management groups. The governance conditions you can apply and cascade by inheritance to all the associated subscriptions. So in the year, management groups give you enterprise grade management at scale, no matter what type of subscriptions you might have. However, all the subscriptions within a single management group So it's it is like called as like an Azure Active Directory, AAD, so which is a tenant. For example, you can apply policies to the management group that limits to the region available for like a virtual machine creation. This policy like you would be applied to all the nested management groups, subscriptions, and the resources, and allow virtual machine creations only if it is an authorized region. So yeah, let's try to understand this hierarchy. So hierarchy of this management group subscription, you can build a flexible structure of management groups and subscriptions to your organize your resources into an hierarchy for unified policy and access the management. So this diagram shows like an example of creating an hierarchy for governance using the management groups. So here you can create an hierarchy that applies a policy as for like an example which limits your virtual machine location to the West US region in the management group called like a production. This policy is like an inherent to all the enterprise agreement subscriptions that are descends to the management group that will help apply to all the virtual machines under those subscriptions. So the security policy cannot be like an altered by the resource or the subscription owner, allowing the like in the governance perspective. One thing is very much important here to understand is like management groups are not currently supported in cost management feature of the Microsoft customer agreement subscription. So which is called as like an MCA subscriptions, that is an Microsoft customer agreement subscriptions. Yeah, here a few more things to understand with respect to the management groups. So important, some of the few important factors is like an 10,000 management groups can be supported in a single directory. So it's like there's an active directory, that concept we are going to discuss in a single active directory. You can handle up to 10,000 management groups as like supported in a single directory. And this management group tree can support up to like a 6 level depth. So here you can see 1, 2, 3, and the 4 levels, but the management group tree can support up to 6 levels in depth. And this limit actually does not include like a root level, or the subscription level. And each management group and subscription can only support one parent. So each management group can have like in many children. So you can see here, so multiple children could have it could have. And all subscriptions and management groups are like an within a single hierarchy in each directory will be taken care. So if you want to understand much more about the root group, so like in root management group for each directory, so each directory is like given in a single top level management group called as like a root management group. So it is going to play as like a top level management. So over the group, so for the subscriptions, for the projects, for the resources that has been accessed and all. So it makes easy to control the over the subscriptions. So if you look into the importance of this root management group, by default, the root management group will be displayed in a name called as like a tenant root group. So whenever you get an access to the Azure, so you can observe that that is called like a tenant root group is a default name for the root management. And it operates itself, the management group, the ID is as same as like an Azure Active Directory tenant ID. And here, to change the display name or your account, you must be assigned as a owner or a contributor actually. And the root management group cannot be moved or like deleted, or is unlike the other management options. So what are the other infrastructure management group or application management group? You can delete those if you don't want. You can create an hierarchy, but in this case, you can't the root one, you can't delete or you can't move the permissions over there. So this is the single level of an hierarchy. So management group. So we understood like in what is actually the management group, what are the subscription, what are the resource groups, what is resource group, what are all things will come up in a resource group. So it could be like an multiple resources in a single group, multiple single project. It could be like an, as we have seen in one of the example, HR, marketing, and the finance. So finance team could have used multiple resources. So the group of those resources, if you don't want the project, so if you don't want one of the application, the resources which has been utilized for that application, you can just directly delete the resource. And directly once you delete that resource, once you delete the resource group, all the resources within that group will be get deleted. So and the billing for that resource group will get stopped. And here one more thing is like you can make use of the resource from different regions. It's not like the same region resources has to be there in a group. You can have a database from the uh, South India, and you can have an hosting resource from the US, and you can have an analytics resource from the Europe. So the resources can be like and from different regions as well, but and you can create a resource group, the collection of those resources as a single group. Cool. So I hope you all able to understand the concepts mainly with respect to the architectural part. So it is like an what is like an Azure region, and Azure, what is the Azure regional pairs and the sovereign region. So the sovereign regions are the US government and the China, and also availability zones, which are the different availability zones are there, and even the Azure data centers, Azure resources and the resource groups, subscriptions, different kind of subscriptions how you can take, and what is a management group in a hierarchy perspective, how many levels you can go with a management group, and even with respect to the resource group subscriptions and the management groups, we have understood the complete hierarchy. So now let's and the next subtopic, that is the Azure compute and the networking services, much more into the technical part. Let's try to understand. So what are the compute types in the Azure? So which are the different compute types will be there in the Azure? So that could be like a container instance or virtual machine and all different ones that we have. Let's try to understand that in detail. And as well, so we'll understand virtual machine options like including the Azure virtual machine, or as like a scale set, availability set, and the virtual desktop, and the resources required for the virtual machine. What are all the resources are required for the virtual machine? And also will application hosting option. So if we need to host the application, so how it could be done? So is it like an web application feature of Azure app service or container or virtual machine? And also we can understand the networking parts, that the virtual networking, including the Azure virtual networks, subnets, peering, and Azure DNS, and the Azure VPN gateway, express route, to different things that we are going to understand in detail in this subtopic. So Azure computing and networking services. So this model is mainly focused on the computer services and the network services available within the Azure. So as I told, the major learning object in this one is like can compare the computers types. So including the container instance, virtual machine, functions, and even with respect to the, you can describe the virtual machine options, including the virtual machine scale set and all. So let's start with this one. So in this, you will be like introduced to compute and the network services. You learn about the three computing options. Yeah. So you will learn about the computing options, that is like a virtual machine, container, and then the Azure functions. So here like in compute service, networking service, storage service, database service, the four things that you're going to understand. First thing is like an compute services. So compute, you'll also learn about with respect to the networking features such as like an Azure virtual network, Azure DNS, and the Azure express route. So let's understand in the computing service, the first is like an Azure virtual machine. So we'll understand what is an Azure virtual machine in deep dive, and also virtual machine scale set, application service, container instance, and the Kubernetes service, and the virtual desktop. So let's go ahead and we'll try to understand in depth each of them. So virtual machine is what we call it as like an just a Azure virtual machine. So you can create and use virtual machines in the cloud. So what actually virtual machine provide? So virtual machines will provide infrastructure as a service in the form of an virtualized server, and can it be used in like in many ways. You can make use of it in a different ways. Just like a physical computer you can use, or as you can customize all the softwares running in your virtual machine. And virtual machines are an like an ideal choice when you need think like to control over the operating system, the ability to run your own custom software you want to run, or else you want to use the custom hosting configurations. So in all such cases, virtual machine is the best option. So as a infrastructure as a service. So Azure virtual machines give you the flexibility to virtualize without like an having to buy and maintain any physical hardware. For example, it's like a personal computer. So if you need a personal computer, you need to buy a system, and you need to buy an RAM for like you need to choose specific RAM for that, and you need to choose the specific storage for that and all. But in case of an Azure virtual machine, it gives the flexibility so of the virtualization without having to buy any of those physical devices, the physical hardware. So it is going to completely runs in the virtual machine. So however, as an infrastructure as a service offering, you still need to configure, update, and maintain the software which is going to run on the virtual machine, because you are the owner of that virtual machine. So the virtual machine is completely yours, so as like your personal computer. So you will be having a complete access to your virtual machine. So it's not like you have a limited access and anything. So you can choose how you need your system. So you have all the flexibility to install the applications or the configurations and all without buying anything in the virtual machine. So it's offering you still need to configure, and whatever the software or the applications that will be running, probably you need to update, and you need to maintain the software that running on your virtual machine. So you can even create or as use an already created image that is like a rapid provision virtual machines, we call it as. And you can create a and provision the virtual machines in few minutes. It won't take long. So it's not mean that you need your virtual machine will be get installed with an operating system and all. So it's a pretty fast. You can create and provision the virtual machines in very few minutes. When you select the pre-configured virtual machine image, so if you ask like what is an image, image is a template used to create a virtual machine. So it's completely, and it contain all the details. So image is a template actually going to help to create a virtual machine, and may already include an operating system and some of the other software like development tools or the web hosting environments and all. In AWS, we call the virtual machine called as like an elastic cloud compute cloud. So it's just called like an EC2, just an additional information related to an AWS. So virtual machine types, over 200 plus, you can choose the form. So in that, so based upon the configurations, you can choose different CPU core, CPU speed, RAM size, temporary hard disk size, and all different ones you can choose in the virtual machines. So the next is like an virtual machine scale set. So let's try to understand the virtual machine scale set and the virtual machine availability sets, and we'll try to understand examples of when to use the virtual machines and all. So virtual machine scale set, it will allow you to create and manage a group of identical load balanced virtual machines. So if you simply create a multiple virtual machines with the same purpose, you need to ensure that they were all configured identically, and you need, and then set up the network routing parameters to ensure efficiency over there. So you would have also have a monitor to utilize for the monitor the utilization to determine if you have need to increase or decrease the number of virtual machines, because in the scale set, you can create and manage a group of identical load balanced virtual machines, multiple ones. So you can go ahead and you can choose like an tens of an virtual machine, hundreds of virtual machines, as many as you want. So instead, with the virtual machine scale set, Azure automates like in most of the work. So scale set actually allows you to centrally manage, configure, and also to update a large number of virtual machines in a minute. So it's not like you need to take care of each and everything. So everything could be get done in a few minutes using a virtual machine scale set. So the scale set is considered like a tool. So it can it help you to create and manage the virtual machines. So it's like a centrally manageable from the different regions if you have a virtual machine. So and you can configure the multiple virtual machines as a single shot, and also you can update the large number of virtual machines in a minute as well. So the important thing is like number of virtual machine instances can automatically increase or decrease in response to the demand. So for example, in your business, you need a virtual machine. So the virtual machines that has been utilized, if the demand increase, so based upon the demand, the number of virtual machines could also auto created. So auto created and like it can support for your customers. And as the demand decreases, it can automatically like compress, and automatically it can reduce as well. So as like an elastic way. So in response to the demand, it can you can set it to scale based upon like a defined scheduled way. So virtual machine scale set also here automatically deploy a load balancer. So to make sure that your resources are being used effectively. So with the virtual machine scale set, you can build large scale services for areas such as like compute, big data, container workloads, and all. Yeah, let's try to understand even much more about the virtual machine availability sets. So availability sets will actually do by grouping virtual machines in two ways. So one is like an update domain and default domain. So if you ask like what is an update domain, the update domain groups the virtual machine that can be rebooted at the same time. So at the same time, all the virtual machines are going to get rebooted. This allowed you to apply like an updates whenever, for example, when we do in reboot, for example, it's not like every time you want to reboot. So if you apply any patch, or as if you apply any software patch or software change update that you have made, so only at that time, so you can reboot all that at the same time. So this update domain allows you to apply the updates while knowing that only one update domain grouping will be like an offline at a time. But the fault domain groups your virtual machine by like a common power source and network switch. So by default, availability set will split your virtual machines across to the 3 fault domains. So and then one after the other, it will reboot them. So it will make sure that it will help you protect against the physical power or like a network failure. So by having the virtual machines in a different like in different fault domains. So if you ask an examples when to use these virtual machines, so it's similar to an physical machine. So I can create like thousands of virtual machines from different region. So when can we make use of these virtual machines, right? So during testing and development part. So first thing, so virtual machine provide you like a quick and easy way to create a different operating system and application configurations to test and to develop your that can easily delete the virtual machines when they are not required much more. And also when running the applications in the cloud, for example, you want to run an application. So this virtual machine ability to run the certain applications in the public cloud as opposed to create a traditional infrastructure. For example, application might need to handle fluctuations in the demand, shutting down the virtual machine when you don't need them, so or quickly starting them to meet the sudden increase in demand can be performed. So and also when extending your data centers to the cloud. So if you are extending your data center to the cloud, you can make use of the virtual machines. And during a disaster recovery process, for example, as with running the certain type of an applications in the cloud, and extending an on-premises network to the cloud, you can get significant cost saving as well, because you don't want to maintain any infrastructure, don't want to maintain any hardware. So using an infrastructure-based approach to the disaster recovery, if a primary data center fails, you can create a virtual machine running on the Azure to run your critical applications and then shut them down. So that works very well. One more thing is with respect to the virtual machine is like a virtual machine resources. So to create a virtual machine resource, so once you go with an hands-on, you will get the complete idea over there. When you provision a virtual machine, you need like a size, the purpose, resources associated with the virtual machine, including like a size, storage, and the networking. So the size means purpose, number of an processor, core processors, the amount of the RAM that is required. Storage disk is like an hard disk drive, solid state drivers, and all required. But in case of a networking, the three things, especially the three main resources are required: size, storage, and the networking. It could be like a public IP address or a private IP address, port configurations, and the virtual network. So these are the different things as a resources required for the virtual machine. So the next is like an app service. Yeah, so Azure App Service is very easy one. So it's like a new pattern running the code in the cloud. So you give your code and configure to the Azure. So that will completely take care of it. It will execute that one. So it will promise the performance wise. So as an end user, end customer, you don't need to worry about the performance wise. Will that works well, or else will that goes down? So and you need an access to the hardware. So nothing to worry about that. So performance, but no access to the hardware. So and it will be like a completely platform as a service. The app services will be run on the cloud. So Azure Container. So those who have studied the DevOps and all probably have a complete idea about what is containers, what is Kubernetes, uh, and all much more in detail. So let's try to understand what is a container first. So it's like an container means just as like a shipping industry, probably in a port you may like and there will be containers. So the same way, just as in shipping industries use physical containers to isolate the different cargoes, right? Or to transport transporting ship and train. Software, like in software development technology, increasingly using an approach called the containerization. So the container, which is called as like a containerization, so it will be used. So it is a completely standard package of software. So known as the package of software means completely set of software. If you need to build an application, maybe you need a tools, so many libraries, so different libraries with specific version. So all the completely as a set. So you will get over here. So as a standard package of software, which is known as a container, so bundle of applications code together with related to the configuration file, libraries. So there could be like a lot of configuration file will be there, a lot of libraries will be there, and also required dependency required for the application to run, right? So all that complete set, which is called as like in containerization. So this actually allows the developers and IT pros to deploy applications seamlessly across the environment. So you no need to worry about the environment. Across any environment, you can make use of these containerizations, containers, and you can go with the development, testing process, and all. So here, the thing is like why you should care about the containers, right? So the problem of the application is like failing to run. You may have seen a lot of time the applications will fail to run correctly when it is moved from one environment to the other. As a world, as like in software development itself, The such problems are typically arise due to the difference in configuration, library requirements, and a lot of other dependencies. So, for example, in one environment, the developer will build an application, but once it is transmitted the code to the other environment in the tester side, during the testing process, it used to fail. So it could be a lot of challenges, a lot of problems due to multiple reasons. So it could be like library requirements mismatch, or it could be configuration mismatch and all. So these containers so address this problem by providing an lightweight, immutable infrastructure for the application, the packaging, and the deployment. So the application or the service, it dependencies like and its configurations are packaged together, and it's called as like a container image. And the container is application can be tested as a unit, and also it can be deployed as a container image instance to the host operating system. So this way, containers enable developers and the IT professionals to deploy the applications across the environments. They don't worry about an environment, in which environment does it work, or is going to fail. So those things, nothing to worry about as well. So the containerization will take care. The container image will be having the completed like can complete the set of softwares or the libraries which is required to deploy and to run. The complete details will be there. So now if you ask, just now we have discussed an virtual machine. So what will be the difference in between the virtual machine and the containers then? So virtual machine also be in a cloud, and the containers are also in a cloud. So what will be the difference then? So let's try to understand just as an idea, what is the major difference in between the container and the virtual machine? So when people think about an virtualization, virtual machine often comes in mind, right? So when they think it's like an cloud, so virtual environment. So in often the first thing comes in mind is like an virtual environment, the virtual machine. So in fact, virtualization can take many forms, and containers are one of those. So the major difference are there in between the virtual machine and the containers. At a high level, let me explain those. Virtual machine virtualize the underlying hardware so that multiple operating system instances can run on the hardware. So each virtual machine run on operating system has access to the virtualized resources representing like an underlying the hardware especially. Virtual machine have many benefits that include like an ability to run different operating system on the same server, more often and cost-effective utilization of the physical resources, faster server provisioning. So on the flip side, each virtual machine contain an OS image, libraries, applications, and even more, right? So and even more will be there on the virtual machine. But let's in the container virtualizer, so it is like an underlying the operating system and cause the containerized application to perceive it is like an perceive it as the operating system, including the CPU, memory, file storage, network connection, and all of its itself. Because of the difference in the underlying operating system and the infrastructure abstracted, so based upon the image in the consistent, the containers can be like an deployed and run anywhere. You don't worry about an operating system or as the environment that you are running. So for developers, it is like an incredibly attractive. They don't want to worry about if they change the environment of the development. So that's mainly because since containers have share the host operating system, so they don't need to boot an operating system or like and load the libraries from your system. So this enables the containers to have like a much more efficient and lightweight containerized application can start in like a few seconds, and more instances of the applications can fit into your machine as compared to the virtual machine scenario. So there are even much more additional benefits are there in the containers. It could be an agility, portability, and the so agility when developers build an application or build and package their application into a container, so and provide them to an IT to run on a standardized platform. So this reduces the overall effort to deploy applications and can streamline the whole development and the test cycles. So this also increases the collaboration and efficiency between the development and the operation teams to ship the apps applications so faster way. And even the portability. So containers provide like a standardized format for the packaging and the holding all the necessary components to run the desired application. So nothing to worry about the portability and the rapid scalability also available. So in that, it's like an containers do not have to be over a typical of like a virtual machine. So including separate operating system instance, many more containers can support on the same infrastructure as well. If you ask like on what are the use cases? So what are the different use cases for this containers? So it is like a completely in cloud native applications. So really on the containers for a common operational model across environments, including public, private, and the hybrid ones that we have discussed. And the low overhead and high density of the containers allow many of them to be hosted inside the same virtual machine and makes them like an ideal for delivering the cloud native applications. Yeah, I know much more information I'm giving about the containers because if the questions arise for the fundamentals in a different way, it makes easy. Once you have an clear-cut idea what is a container, what is an if you have a better understanding about an container and the virtual machine, what is the difference in between these two? So there will be no confusion. So easily you can understand the questions and help you to answer in your fundamentals, like AZ900 examination. Yeah, going forward. So the next one is like an Azure Virtual Desktop. So Azure Virtual Desktop is like just give me a minute. Yeah, so let's understand the Azure Virtual Desktop in detail and what are the features over there in the Azure Virtual Desktop. So Azure Virtual Desktop, formerly it is called as like an Windows Virtual Desktop. So in minutes, it's like and to enable the secure remote work. So it will provide an familiarity and the compatibility of like the latest Windows operating system with the new scalable multi-session experience that you will get for the end whoever it would be like an end users. And you can manage your end-to-end Azure Virtual Desktop deployment with respect to the alongside the other Azure services and within the Azure portal. So you can from the like it's completely like your Windows desktop. So you can access a lot of things over the Azure Virtual Desktop. So if you ask me like again why it is in desktop, so Azure Virtual Desktop is a desktop that the applications virtualization service that completely runs on the cloud. The thing is like when you run Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure, so it will set up a multi-session Windows 11 or Windows 10. So deployment that you will get that delivers a full Windows experience with a scalability environment. And also it present Microsoft 365 applications, whatever that you will get for enterprise, and or you can optimize it to run on the multi-user virtual scenarios. And also you'll get like an Windows 7 virtual desktops with the free extendable security updates that you get as well, but you will get most is like an by default Windows 11. And so it brings you the existing remote desktop service that is like called as like an RDS. So it is you feel as like it is completely a remote desktop. So it means you are accessing the desktop remotely. So as you access your someone's desktop remotely, similar way. So you will get the remote desktop services and Windows service desktops and applications to any computer. So this virtualize both the desktop and as well as the applications. So you can manage desktops and applications from different Windows and Windows Server operating system with like an unified management experience. So one more important thing here, Azure Virtual Desktop extends support for like a Windows 7 session host of virtual machines. So that has been going to stop. That is going to be end from the Jan 10th of 2023. So the upcoming next year, that is on the next month, Jan 10th, after that, so the support for Windows 7, so probably most of the customers are going to make use of an Windows 7. So from the long, so that's going to get stopped, though support is going to stop. So then you have to relay back on either Windows 10 or Windows 11, especially the operating system virtual desktop. So if you ask me what are the different capabilities that the virtual desktop can offer, so the environment, scalable and flexible environment can offer. So here you can create a full desktop virtualization environment on your like an Azure subscription without like an running any gateway or any servers. And also you can publish like an pools multiple many as you accommodate like an driver workloads, and you can bring your like an image for the production workload or as like a test from the Azure gallery. And you can, and also major thing is like, and it reduces the cost of multi-session resources within few with their new Windows 11 and Windows 10 enterprise multi-session capability. You can deploy and manage virtual desktops as well here, and also it helps you to assign and connect users to the virtual desktop. So like an once assigned, users can launch any Azure virtual desktop client to connect to their published desktop, Windows desktop and applications. And also with respect to the security, securely establish users through resolve the connections over here. So they will, the end-to-end security will be provided. So, and with respect to the desktop, the Azure desktop HTML5 web client will also be supported in the Azure desktop. So now let's understand about networking services. So in this one, the four networking services are covered. One is an virtual network, and the next one is like an VPN. So that's the gateway, and also the VNet peering, and also the express route. So let's understand in depth of each of that. So Azure networking services. So networking services in Azure, in AWS, this virtual network is called as like an virtual private cloud. There is an VPC, just for an additional information. So in the networking services in Azure provide like a variety of networking capabilities that can be like an user to use it together, or else you can use it separately as well. So looking at the capabilities, like an about these networking services, the first one is like an connectivity service. So connectivity service, second is an protection service, third is like a delivery service, and the monitoring service. So let's discuss each of them. So let's look into the what is an connectivity service. So in the connectivity service, connects like an Azure resources. What are the multiple resources that will be there? So Azure resources and on-premise resources using any or like an combination of these networking services in Azure. So it is like an Azure network, that is like a virtual network, VNet, or virtual WAN, or as like an express route, VPN gateway, virtual network, NAT gateway, and Azure DNS, so peering service, and Azure base station. So these are the different ones which comes under the connectivity services. So the next one is like an with respect to the protection security section. So the DDoS protection, and that is a distributed denial of service attack protection, Azure firewall, and the network security groups and the private link. So these are the different ones. Not an exam. Okay. Oh, just a minute. Okay. Yeah, let me explain things for you. So, and the next one is like an application protection service. So in this, the second one is as an application protection service. It will protect your applications using any or like a combination of the network services. So in Azure, it is like an load balancer, private link, DDoS protection, firewall, and also it could be like a network security group, web application firewall, and a network virtual network endpoints. So it could be different ones. And the third is like an application delivery services. So delivery applications in the Azure network using like an any or in the combination of these networking services in Azure, it content like an content delivery network. We call it as like an CDN. And Azure front door service, traffic manager, application gateway, internet analyzer, or as like a load balancer. So these are the different ones which comes under the application delivery services. And the last is then a monitoring service. So the monitoring service helps you to monitor your network resources using any or as like a combination of these network services in the Azure. So we will discuss in detail in depth of these monitoring services in the module 3. So that's like an Azure network watcher or express route monitor, Azure monitor, and also there is an called as like an tap. Tap is like an VNet terminal access point. So these are the different ones. So network monitoring. So these are the different ones which comes under the types of networking services: connectivity service, application, there is the protection service, delivery service, and the last is a monitoring service. So in this, all the four, the networking services, the virtual network, VPN gateway, let's try to understand each of them. So Azure Virtual Network, so we can call it as like an VNet as well. So this is the fundamental building block for your private network in the Azure. So whenever you want to create a private network, so the building block for the your virtual network. So the virtual network will be the basic building block for your private network that is going to be created in the Azure. So now the question comes up: why it is the fundamental building block? So communication between the Azure resources could happen. So you can deploy virtual machine and several other type of an Azure resources that will be used. So for that reason, communication between the Azure resources to take care. So such as like an Azure application service environments, Azure Kubernetes service that is like an AKS, and Azure virtual machine scale set. So a lot of the things that to be taken care by making use of a communication between the Azure resources. And the thing is like communication between the each other, so multiple virtual machine, right? So you can create like a multiple virtual machine virtual, so between the communication between them by making use of a virtual network and enabling those resources in either virtual network or like in communicating each other using an virtual network peering. And also you can communicate to the internet, so all the resources in the virtual network can communicate outbound to the internet by default. You can communicate to the inbound by resources as well, and also communicate with the on-premises network. So like in different features are available. So keeping in that mind, so uh, like virtual network will be the virtual network VNet will be the basic building block for your virtual machines. So the one route before going to the VPN gateway and VNet pairing, so the one is like an express route. So this express route sounds interesting, right? So let's try to understand what is this express route. So express route enables you to extend your on-premise network to the Microsoft cloud over a private connection facilitated. So by connectivity provider. So this connection is completely a private, and the traffic does not go over the internet. So with the express route, you can establish connection to the Microsoft cloud service, such as like in Microsoft Azure, Microsoft 365, and the dynamics, and also that is the dynamics 365. So different ones, right? So to understand what is an express route, so like, and it's an express route will extend your on-premises network to the Microsoft cloud on a private connection. So connectivity can be from to like, and from an any to any. So it's like an IPVPN network. So a point-to-point Ethernet network or virtual cross connection through the connectivity provider could be done. So express route connections don't go over the public internet. So it will completely goes over the private network. So it won't be a public network. One more important thing here is like an express route. The Microsoft Edge describes the Edge routers on the Microsoft side of the express route circuit. This is the express route circuit point of entry into the Microsoft network. There could be like an few of them are the key benefits also there. Layer 3 connectivity between the on-premises network and the Microsoft cloud through a connectivity provider, that is IPVPN. So point-to-point Ethernet connections is going to happen. So connectivity to Microsoft cloud service across all regions is the, like an geo-optical region, and a global connectivity to Microsoft service across all regions with the express route premium add-on. So for that, you need to pay additional as the services that you use, you need to pay for that in the Azure. Let's try to understand VPN gateway. So what is an VPN gateway, and then let's understand VNet pairing. So VPN gateway helps you to create an encrypted cross-premises connection to your virtual network from an on-premises location, or created encrypted connection between the virtual network. So there are like a different configurations available for the VPN gateway connection, such as like a site-to-site, point-to-site, and VNet to VNet. So those are the different configurations available in the VPN gateway. VPN gateway. Let's jump on to the Azure pairing service. So the Azure pairing service will enhance the customer connectivity to the Microsoft cloud service, such as like an Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and also software as a services, the SaaS services, and also the Microsoft service accessible via the public internet. So to understand what is an Azure pairing service, so Azure pairing service is a networking service actually that enhance the customer connectivity to the different ones, as I mentioned, SaaS, Dynamic, or Microsoft 365, and all. So any Microsoft service accessible or the public internet, this one, Microsoft has like an partnered with an internet service providers. So there is there could be like a multiple internet service provider in every nation. So they have a separate partnership. So with respect to the with each internet service provider, internet exchange partners, and also with SDCI, we call it. This is a software defined cloud interconnector providers all over the worldwide. So to provide especially reliable, high-performing public connectivity with optimal routing from the customer to the Microsoft network. So that is major preference they will give. So very less latency they will prefer, and very speed connectivity, speed data sharing will be taken care. Cool. So we have discussed a lot of things with respect to the networkings, and we have discussed the monitoring services and all, connectivity, protection, delivery, monitoring management tools, that is the Network Watcher, Express Route Monitor, Azure Monitor. In depth, we are going to discuss this in the module 3 as well. So we are able to complete the second subtopic of the Azure. So trying to understand much more about virtual machine options and the computing types over there, and also virtual networking, including the DNS, VPN, and all, express route, public and private endpoints, and all. Now let's try to understand the Azure storage services. So this is our third subtopic of the day. So there are like different Azure storage services are available. Let's understand each of them. Okay, so Azure Storage Service in this before going in depth, so let's try to understand. So what is a storage platform in Azure, in the Microsoft Azure? So Azure Storage Platform is Microsoft Cloud Storage. So the solution for modern data storage scenarios. Azure Storage offers like high available, massively scalable, durable, and secure storage. So when the data is stored somewhere, we have to make sure that the data has to be very much secured. So secured storage for variety of data objects in the cloud. So it's not supposed to be a specific objects. It has to be a different kind of objects has to be there. And Azure Storage data objects are accessible from anywhere from the world over HTTP, HTTPS, via the REST API. It has to be. So it's not supposed to be a limited access when you store the data over remotely, like and when you store the data in the virtually in the Azure. So it has to be accessible globally. So you could access it from anywhere. So you can make use of an HTTP protocol or HTTPS or as the REST API application peripheral interface using the REST API integration. You must be able to access your data. Yeah. So Azure Storage data objects are accessible from anywhere in the world over HTTP, HTTPS, or as REST API. So the storage, sorry, the storage also offers like a client libraries for the developers to build an application services with a different programming language. You may think of which kind of a programming language that to be used, right? So different kind of programming languages like .NET, Java, Python, JavaScript, C++, and Go programming. So you can make use of any of that. If you are familiar in one programming language, is more good enough to take care of the resources in the Azure. So developers and the IT professionals can use, there's a concept called as like an Azure PowerShell, the tool called as like an Azure PowerShell and Azure command line interface to write the script. So you may need to write a script for based upon your application and based upon your resources that you're using. So you can make use of either a PowerShell or else you can make use of an Azure command line interface to write a script for data management and the configuration the task. So there could be a different kind of a task. So Azure Portal and the Storage Explorer will provide you user interface tools for interacting with the Azure storage. So there is a completely, the portal is like an home desktop. So the portal is like an dashboard. So it contains a lot of the things. So from that portal or as the Storage Explorer, you can get an user interface. So with a graphical interface, you will get the permissions to access the storage storages. Explorer, it will provide an storage options. You can access from the access it, and you can configure the storages as well. So there are a lot of benefits in the Azure storage. So if you look into the benefits, there could be like an durable and high available. So it is like an redundancy, ensures that the data is safe. That's much more important, right? So in the event of transit, the hardware failure. So your data has to be very secure and safe. You can also opt to replicate your data across different data center. So you can replicate not only the different data center in the same zone, but it could be like in different regions as well. So you can opt to store your data in different region. And the secure is like an all the data returned to an Azure storage account is like an encrypted by the service. And Azure storage provides you with a fine grained control over all the data to access your data. And scalability. So Azure storage is like and designed to be like massively scalable to meet the data storage and manage in a way it handle the hardware maintenance, update, critical issues which will come up. And also in the accessible wise, as I mentioned, you can access it from anywhere from the worldwide using an HTTP or HTTPS. So even as a developer, if you need to access the data, there are like an client libraries, SDKs will also available in a different programming language, .NET, Java, Node.js, Python, PHP, Ruby, Go, different programming languages could be used. So let's try to understand the blob storage. What is like and the container, or it's like we call it as like a blob and the file storage. So Azure Blob. So before going the Azure Blob, so yeah, let me give you an overview of those so that helps to understand. Azure Blob is like a massively scalable object store or like a store for the text and the binary data. So the blob is like you can like it include like and support the big data analytics through the data lake storage generation too. So there's an like an Azure files managed that is used to manage the file shares or the for the cloud or like a non-premises deployments. And Azure Queue is the concept. Azure Queue, so that helps you to like as to store the or like a reliable messaging between the application components. The disk is like a block level storage volumes for the Azure virtual machines. Let's understand the blob storage. That's an Azure blob. So the thing is like we need to understand what is a blob and when to use. Both are very much important with respect to the storages. So Azure blob is completely an unstructured data to be stored. It's not a structured data. So it's not mean that you are going to store a very structured data. It's a completely unstructured data to be stored and accessed at a massive scale, like in blobs. So also it also support like an Azure data lake for the enterprise big data analytic solutions. So if you think when to use this one, so you want your application to support streaming and random access scenario, or else you want to be able to access application data from anywhere, or else you want to build an enterprise data lake on Azure and perform big data analytics. In all these different kind of scenarios, you can make use of an Azure blob and there's the blob storage. And why it is called as a blob? So the blob, the acronym, so backronym, which is a binary large object. So the collection of binary data, the binary data could be in the form of a file or stored in a storage account and a data stored in your database. In AWS, the storage account is called as like a simple storage service. There's an additional information. So what would be called in an AWS? That is, we can't call it as an S3 bucket. So if you have worked on AWS, you may have heard the storage, the most popular one, which is called as like an S3 bucket. So these are the different options available over there. So to access the tire, art pool, and the archive, performance tire, standard, and the premium. So locations you can choose whichever the location, redundancy, and the replications you can keep, and the failover options can be maintained. The next is a disk, Azure disks, or as a disk storage. So Azure disk or disk storage allows data to be persistently stored and accessed from an attached virtual Azure hard disk. So keep that in mind. So it will allow you to store the data and access from the virtual hard disk. So that's the name. It's like a disk storage, virtual hard disk. So when to use this one? If you think like that, when you want to lift and shift, it's like an applications that use native file system and APIs to read and write the data and the persistent disk. So this could be used. Or also you want to store data that is not related to be accessed from outside the virtual machine to which like a disk is attached. So in such cases, you can make use of this disk storage. It's like a completely unmanaged disk, and you can reserve the capacity in advance. It's like a completely, you can think like hard disk. So in your personal computer, how the hard disk will be like in reserved storage will be there. So in the similar way, the same manner, so this virtual disk could be managed. To understand much more about the blob, so I would like to give the much more information about the blob storage. So because the blob storage, many more questions will come arise from for the examination. So block storage is a Microsoft object storage solution for the cloud. So block storage is optimized for the storing massive amount of unstructured data. It's not like a structured one, such as text or binary data. The block storage is ideal for like serving images, documents directly to an browser or storing the files for distributed access, streaming the video or audio, as like storing data for backup and restore the disaster recovery. So it's like in different ways that you can make use of it. And also the clients can also securely connect to this blob storage by using an SSH file transfer. Probably you may have used FTP. FTP protocol is like an file transfer protocol. If it is an SFTP, that is an SSH file transfer protocol. The amount of blob storage containers using the network file system, that is an NOFS protocol. And one more thing is like Azure Files, that is the file storage. So Azure Files is like enables you to set up highly available network files shared that can be accessed by using the industry standard, which is an server message block, so SMB protocol, and also network file system, that is an NFS protocol, and Azure Files REST API. These are the three ways it could be get done. File shares can be used like in many common scenarios. On-premises applications use like an file share, and the configuration file can be stored on the file share, and also resource log or the metrics can be crashed or dumped, or just like an some of the examples you can store over there in the file share. There is the file storage. Yeah, we have discussed most of the things. Disk storage. Yeah, as I've explained, Azure Managed Disk is a completely and virtual hard disk. So you can think of it like a physical disk in on-premises server, right? So virtualized, but it's an virtualized. So Azure Managed Disk are stored as a page like in blobs, which can like a random input-output storage object. We can call the managed disk managed because it is an abstraction over the page. So block containers and Azure storage accounts with managed disk, all you have to do is like and provision the disk, and Azure take care of it. Rest of the things you don't want to worry about that. Yeah, cool. A lot of things that we are discussed about the storage. So now let's discuss the last topic, the very interesting one. So that is an Azure identity, access, and security. So Azure identity and access and the security. So in this model, like and in this subtopic, so it covers an authorization, authentication. Yeah, just a second. Yes. So it's completely about an authorization, authentication methods which are available in the Azure. And also in this module, in this submodule, you will discuss about an, as I was mentioning, Azure Active Directory. You will learn and what is an Azure Active Directory, like an AAD or like an Azure AD. And we'll describe about an authentication methods which will be used in the Azure, including single sign-on SSO, multi-factor authentication, that is an MFA, and the passwordless. So these three topics are important. So that's like an single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, and the passwordless. And also we need to describe the external identities and guest access in the Azure. And also we need an Azure Active Directory conditional access, Azure role-based access control, that is an RBAC, and the concept of an zero trust, and the purpose of the Azure, that is the defense in the depth model that we will understand. So, and also at last, Microsoft Defender for the cloud. So what is the Defender concept in the Microsoft? So that is recently has been launched as well. Recently, this is like a few months back. So that's what is a Microsoft Defender for the cloud. So in the security aspect, we'll understand in depth. Yeah. So first thing is like an identity. What is mean by an identity? So if you have your own identity, how you will showcase it? It shows that how you are unique from the others. So what is the identification that has to be like and made you unique? So that's what the identity will tell. So the two things is like an authenticate and authorize. So how you will be authenticated, on what identification you will be authenticated. So those are the different things that we are going to discuss now. So as like an identity service in the Azure, it's like an authentication, authorization, or as like an your admin, or as like an if you take up an organization, so there will be an unique identification number will be the same. They're like an I'm the employee of this organization with an specifically with this role. So there will be a unique role will be also be like an given for the each person. So based upon this role, I'm in this organization. So I have like in this unique identification. You need to identify yourself. So in computing, identity is a representation of a person or application or as a device. So in a cloud computing, there are multiple resources will be running. So to access those resources, who can try? Either a person can try to access that resource, or else in a single application, any different kind of an application could have tried to access that resource. Or by end of the day, it's like in any of the device. So the device, it could be your mobile phone, or as the laptop, or as your servers, so or as any of the database to access it from your machine. So you are trying to the devices, especially it could have tried to access the resources on the Azure. So for that we need an identification. So examples of identity. So it's like in the name. So the name with an surname or as the initial, most of you will be having an unique identification. So the sum of the identification will comes with an email address. So the email address with an unique email username. So the username will be completely an unique identification. And some of the applications, monthly payroll. So the payroll will be not be the same for everyone. So the unique identification. The laser printer, for example. So that's a device. The device will be also have a unique identification based upon the MAC address. So there's a medium access control. The MAC address is a unique identification address which will be represented for each device, unique identification for the devices. So in this way, we are going to identify each person, or as like an application, or else it could be an devices. So separately identified and uniquely identified. So during the identification, it's not like seamlessly just by the username, you'll be identified. So you need a password, or else like a secret key, or else like a certificate is like can separate the key. So to identify yourself, right? So many applications require you to log in to use some of its functionality. So in such cases, you will go with the traditional way. How you will try to access is like you may try to access it with for example, your Gmail. To access your Gmail, you could have make use of your email address and the password. So the email address and the password will be used. So in that very traditional way, how it will be maintained. So it will be maintained in a way the user will sign up. Once after the sign up, so the username and the password will be maintained in a database. So the things which will be maintained in a database, once the next time when the user will try to log in, so whenever the next time the user will try to access the database, whenever the user will try to access his account, so he will provide with his user ID and the password. He will provide the user ID and the password. So the server will take the user ID and the password and it will check. So it will try to validate with respect to the database. So if the user ID, whatever it's given, the first thing it will check with the user ID. Okay, the user ID is matching. So with respect to that specific user ID, does the password is going to match? It's going to verify. If both the things, user ID and the password will match, then it is the server is going to respond back with based upon the request. So this is like an client and server model. So very traditional, like an old model. The traditional way it has been taken care. So some of the companies have written their own code to handle this one. So it's not supposed to be like they have to maintain the same one. So they have written their own code, especially to take care of the things like to handle the server, as to handle their customer database and for the identification of their customers. So it's an easy method. Some of the more famous hack have been like in custom created identity systems. So they're like a lot of hackers have tried. It makes easy for them this traditional way, the identification. So it's a very made easy for them to hack it, hack the databases and to hack the user accounts. So one among that is like so few of the hacking is like in some companies write sorting the password in a plain text, so which is easy to access. And some companies were use the simple reversible hash technology as algorithm. That's an MD5 is one of the hash algorithm. So that algorithm, which is very much easy to access, the algorithm could be easily used to hack. And some companies were sorting the salt along with the data. That is a salt algorithm, like a salt method, which will be called. So that's like a very simple way. I'm not going in depth to explain what is like a salt method for the hacking process and all. Though it's like a very easy method, easily could have tried to perform the like an hacking process. And some companies like not enforce like an enforcing the password. For example, if you are working in any organization, probably you have tried so to especially to access or else to access your email, or else to access your account. For every 3 months once, it could have asked you to change the password. So it will enforce you, it will force you to change the password. So, or else it will be get blocked by end of the day. So you need to go ahead and you need to change, you need your admin, request your admin to generate a random password and to give the permission. So, or else if you are not change the password, if you keep on changing the password for every 3 months, within the 3 months, you can keep accessing your account. And not enforcing password complexity policy. Complexity policy, probably you may all have observed. It is like, so to access the account, you may sign up during the sign up process. So it may ask you to give the password. So it is like with the limitation like a minimum characters, 7 to 14 characters. And in addition to the characters, it may ask you to add a number, and it may ask you to add some special characters, to ask you to include an minimum capital letter, the small case letter. So these are like a different complexity. It will ask you to generate the password. So these are the different things that need to be taken care, especially to enforcing your customers to generate a password with a complexity policy, and enforcing your customers to uh, and to keep changing the password for like an every 3 months once. So to make sure that, and making sure that the password will not be shared with other employees or with any other one else. So Azure provides an identity management system based upon their popularity. So the popular thing. So that's like an Active Directory. So we are going to discuss this Active Directory in detail today. So what is an Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, what it's going to play a role as well. So it will be called in a different names. So Azure Active Directory, or as Azure AD, or as AAD. So this is a directory service that enables you to sign in and access both the Microsoft Cloud application and cloud applications that you develop. So Azure Active Directory can also help you maintain your on-premises Active Directory deployment as well. For on-premises environment, Azure Active Directory running on Windows Server provide an identity and access management service that managed by your organization. So Azure Active Directory is Microsoft Cloud based identity and access management service. So with Azure Active Directory, you can control the identity accounts. So it's not as the same, the Active Directory. So it has been updated over the days, so like from the years as well. So you can control the identity account by Microsoft ensures that the services is available globally. And if you have worked with an Azure Active Directory, Azure Active Directory will be like a more familiar to you. So when you secure identities on premises with the Azure Active Directory, Microsoft does not monitor sign-in attempts. When you connect Active Directory with an Azure Active Directory, that's like Microsoft can help protect you by detecting the suspicious sign-in attempt at no extra cost. For example, Azure Active Directory can detect sign-in attempts from unexpected locations or unknown devices. So the traditional Active Directory does not work with internet protocol. That's with respect to as a service, it's going to work. Azure Active Directory provide you the identity as a service. So it will take care of it completely, the role. So what are the different things this can do? Let's try to understand. So Azure Active Directory, you can provide whatever the things is like, and first thing is like an IT administrators. So administrators can use Azure Active Directory to control access to applications and also it's like an resources based on their business requirement. So application developers actually can also access this Azure Directory, Active Directory. Developers can use this Azure Active Directory to provide a standard-based approach for adding functionality to applications that build, and also to developers to compute, to write the program, and adding single sign-on functionality to the application, or enabling an application to work with an user existing credentials will be taken care of. So users as well. So users can manage their identities and take maintenance action like self-service password reset and online service subscriptions. So like Microsoft 365, or as like an Azure and Microsoft Dynamics CRM online subscription already using the Azure Active Directory can authenticate into their account. So what actually this do, the Azure Active Directory? So this provide a lot of things, services. So especially like an authentication. So this include like an verifying identity to access application and resources. So, oh yeah, I have just applied for that. So the benefits over the Azure Active Directory, that is the authentication. So this includes like verifying identity to access application and the resources. It also includes providing functionalities such as self-service password reset, multi-factor authentication, a custom list of banned passwords, and smart Outlook services. So the different ones. And also single sign-on. So what is the single sign-on? Single sign-on actually enables you to remember only one username and one password to access multiple applications. So that is like a single sign-on. So a single identity is tied to the user. So it simplifies the security model. So users change the roles or leave an organization, access modifications are like and try to the identity, which greatly reduces the efforts when needed to change the, or like disable the accounts. Application management also can be taken care. It is like, and you can manage your cloud and on-premises applications by using Azure Active Directory. The features like application proxy, software as a service applications, and the like an My Apps portal, single sign-on provide the better user experience overall that. And the thing is like the last one, the last benefit you can think like a device management. Along with accounts for the individual people, so Azure Active Directory supports the registration of the devices. Registration like enables the devices to manage thoroughly tools like Microsoft Intune. It also allows for devices based on conditional access policy to restrict the access attempt to only those coming from like a known devices, regardless to the requesting the account. These are the different benefits over the Azure Active Directory. So that is the identity provider. In this diagram, you can see, so the first user ID and the password will be shared with the identity provider. Identity provider will be signed the token, and then it will be the signed token will be shared with the web server. It's the signed token and the trust key. So if it matches in the both the sides, so then it's good to access the server applications or as the services which is required. So now the question is, can I connect my on-premises Active Directory with Azure Active Directory? So the question could have come in mind. If you had an on-premises environment running an Active Directory and a cloud deployment using the Azure Active Directory, so you would need to maintain two identity sets, right? So however, you can connect the Active Directory with the Azure Active Directory, enabling a consistent identity experience between the cloud and the on-premises. So to perform this, one method of connecting Azure Active Directory with your on-premises Active Directory is using Azure Active Directory Connect. So this is to connect the services in between the cloud and the on-premises. So Azure Active Directory Connect synchronizes your identities between on-premises Active Directory and then Azure Active Directory. So Azure Active Directory Connect synchronizes the changes between both. If any changes happens in both the sides, it will get synchronized. If you use, you can use like features like a single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, self-service password reset under this one. SAML, OpenID, WS federations, and these are benefits that we have discussed. So different benefits is like and device management, application management, and the authentication, single sign-on, different things that we have discussed. And the security. Yeah, like an authentication process in the authentication method. So we'll try to understand what is like a single sign-on SSO. Just a minute. So in this process, like in during the authentication, the identification, single sign-on, as I mentioned, so it enables the user to sign in one time and use the credentials to access like in multiple resources. It could be like in multiple applications from different providers. For example, SSO to work with the different applications, and the providers must trust the initial authenticator. Yeah, single sign-on. And then two more things to understand is like Azure Active Directory. Sorry, some of the slides have been repeated, so I'm just going the next. Yeah, single sign-on, synchronizing with your corporate ID, conditional access. Yeah, multi-factor authentication. So I'll just explain what is an Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication. So Azure Active Directory multi-factor authentication is like it's like a Microsoft service that provide multi-factor authentication capabilities. So whenever you perform multi-factor authentication, enables user to choose additional form of an authentication during signing, such as like a phone call or like a mobile application notification or as like a message token. So different kind of whenever you want to try to log in, so probably you may get an OTP, right? So the OTP, or else you may get a call, or as the like a token to your email address. So different authentication forms can be chosen. So that which is called as like a multi-factor authentication. So two or more piece of an evidence factors in order to log in, that is considered as like an multi-factor authentication. So there are three factors. One for the authentication, the one is like in something you know. The one you know is a password. The password that you know, so you can type it. So something you have is like in devices. For the secondary authentication, you can make use of a phone, or else you can make use of an email account. So based upon the devices that you have, so you can authenticate. And something you are like a fingerprint or like a face recognition. So much more on the instead of, for example, if your phone, if you have it, so the authentication method one could be a fingerprint. You're like a face recognition. So even though some of the web application will make use of a face recognition to match the face, so identify the person. So these are the different factors could be considered for the multi-factor authentication. Your unique password could be one piece of an evidence to access the like multiple applications and services in the cloud. But second piece of the evidence is required to unique and time-limited code sent to you. So time-limited code is like the code which will be sent over the it could be like an OTP. So for the OTP to enter, it could be a time limit. It could be like an 35 seconds or like in 60 seconds. So there will be a time limit, and even if it is an over the email, if any OTP or like an code has been sent, so there will be a time limit. So to enter that code and to get access to your services. The next is role-based access control. Yeah. So as I mentioned, in an organization, there could be a multiple. It's not like a single role will be there. So there could be like a multiple roles will be there. So based upon that role, the access will be provided. So let's understand what is an RBAC, that is an role-based access control. So accessing the so accessing management for like in cloud resources in a critical function, for example, in an organization. So that is like I'm using the cloud. So Azure role-based control helps to manage who has access to Azure resources, what they can do. So those resources and what are all the things they can do it with. For example, it's not like everyone can create a database and everyone can delete a database, or else it's not mean that everyone can write into the data into the database. So whoever have an access to the database, it's not mean that everyone can delete the database. So there will be limited permissions. So what can I do with the Azure RBAC? So the thing is like it will like allow the user to manage the virtual machine in the subscription and the other user to manage the virtual network. So there is a limited thing. Some could have access to the virtual machine, but the same person could doesn't have an access to the virtual network. So there could be a different one. So in that allows the DBA group to manage the SQL databases in a subscription and allows the user to manage all resources in a resource group, such as virtual machines, websites, subnets, and all. So there's actually to understand this, there could be like a role definition will be there. So role is like a collection of permissions. So it's typically just called a role. So it means list of actions that can be performed, such as read, write, or delete. So roles can be like an eye level, like an owner, or as like a specific to the like virtual machine reader. So different kinds of roles could be given to the employees in an organization. So create roles that represents the common task of the job. So it can the roles once it's created, so it can you can assign the task, you can assign the job for the roles as well. So accountant, developer, business lead. So each role will have a different access, different permissions as well. Assigning the granular permissions to that role. So you need whenever you add a like a role permission, like a role. So for that role, you need to provide the permissions as well. So for some roles, it could be like an owner, the one will be having a owner role. So you have all the permissions. So and some could have like a very limited role that is like an having a permissions, limited permissions, just to write the data, read the data, or just to very limited permissions. Assign users to the role. So once in an organization, if any new employee has been joined, so in such case, so there could be, you need to assign the permission, assign the user to the role. You need to, once the employee has been joined, so you need to assign a role for him as like a developer or as team lead or as the manager. So account manager or like a different kind of permissions could be like, and the roles could be assigned based upon the role, the permission will be as maintained. So do not assign granular permission to an individual. So there will be different permissions, reader, contributor, owner, and all. So that will be used typically based upon the role, based upon the permission requirement. So permission to be assigned. So now let's try to understand what is an zero trust methodology. So in Microsoft, they can adopted a modern approach to security, which is called like a zero trust. So which is actually based upon the principle like a never trust or as like an always verify. So based upon this concept, they adopted an this principle, the approach, which is called the zero trust model or zero trust methodology. Okay, zero trust is a new security model that assumes like can breach or else it can verifies each request, whatever the request will come to the service, right? As though it is originated from the uncontrolled network, or is this an thing is like a controlled one. So everything will be validated. So the principles, if you look like, and so on the zero trust is like an very explicitly always authenticate and authorize the all available data points, and also it will privilege the access. So it user access with just in time or just enough access. So two things based upon the just in time or just enough access, or else like an adaptive policy, data protection, and also assume breach. So minimize the blast radius, and also verify the end-to-end encryption. So based upon a lot of things, it will just work. It won't work. Everything goes good behind the firewall. The firewall is like a set of rules. Based upon the set of rules, it works fine. It won't consider in that perspective. So that's what the three things, as I mentioned. The one is like verifying the explicitly. So it will always authenticate and authorize all the available data points, and use like an least privileged access. So limit user access. It will provide. It is like based upon just in time or as just enough access. That is a JIT and the JEA. Risk-based adaptive policies and the data protections will be considered. And assuming the breach is like a minimal radius, and that's like a segment access. It will provide like an end-to-end encryptions and use the analytics to get the visibility over the data detection and the detection of the threat detection, improve the defenses. So use every available method to validate identity and the authorization. So that's the security policy enforcement in the Azure is a center to zero trust architecture actually. So this include the multi-factor authentication. So with the conditional access that takes into a user account risk, device status, and the other criteria and the policies that we will set. So and also identity devices means I call it as like an endpoint. So data, application, network, infrastructure components, all the configured appropriate security, everything will be taken care as a coordinated in the zero trust strategy. So as an example, if you take, so devices policy determine the criteria for healthy devices, and the conditional access policy require healthy devices to access the specific applications and data in the Azure cloud. So just in time and yeah, there's like just enough access. It's like a limited user access with just in time or like just enough access. It's a risk-based adaptive policy that comes under the least privileged access for the data protection. Interact. This is the complete architecture. So this representing the primary elements that contribute for a the zero trust architecture. So the approach actually extended throughout the entire digital area, and server as like an integrated security philosophy, right? So as I mentioned, security policy enforcement is the center. So on the zero trust architecture, this actually include multi-factor authentication with the specific conditional access that is taken care into the user account risk and the device status and the other criteria. So as I told, identity devices, that is the devices is data endpoints, and the data application network and the other infrastructure components are all configured with the appropriate policies, security policies. So for each of the components are coordinated with our zero trust strategy. And threat protection and intelligence monitors actually that environment surface current risk and takes the automated action to remediate the attacks. So in this case, as an alternative to the deployment, the provides the configuration steps like an each of the technology components protect the zero trust principle. So which is a rapid modernization plan is based upon the initiatives to give the set of and deployment paths for more quickly implementing the things. Yeah, verify and secure each identity. So the identification will be, as we discussed, like a multi-factor authentication, or as like a zero trust methodology, or as like a single sign-on. So verify and the security each identity will be taken care, and the devices ensure the compliance and the L status applications appropriate in-app permissions monitor the user actions in each and everything. Data-driven protection, encryption, and the resistant access will be given. So for in each and every request will be validated. Infrastructure robust monitoring to detect the attack, blob, and the flag risky behavior. If there's any risky behavior, if there's anything figured out, so immediate notification, alert, and notification will be given to the owner of the subscriber or the subscriber. In this network, complete end-to-end encryption will be made so for the secured data transmission, secured data communications. Okay, so the next one is like an defenses in depth. So these let's try to understand in Azure what is that defense in depth. So a defense in depth is like a security strategy in the Azure that prevents the data breach and slow down the unauthenticated unauthenticated ways. So it's like security is like a key factor. So in the defense in a depth strategy in the Microsoft Azure, so the organization protects the data from the breach. So a company with a powerful security system is like bound to garner like in customer trust and satisfactions, right? So Microsoft Azure has like a wealth of plans and strategies to that enables its customers to protect from information and authenticate the access. So the defense's depth is like a security strategy. So that prevents data breach, slow down the unauthenticated attempts to access the data by deploying an intensive environment with like 7 layers of protection and validation. And also this this Microsoft deploys this defense in depth strategy in both the on-premises data centers and in the Azure cloud services. The principle actually helps to define the security posture or like in confidentiality, integrity, and availability. So confidentiality means like it's a pillar, ensures that protect surface that can be accessed only by those who have the granted permission. Integrity is like an unique fingerprint that of the data is like created by one way hashing algorithm. Availability data should be like able to available only to an authentic users that should be like have an access. So security, the layers we can see here: data, application, computer, network, a perimeter, identity access, and the physical. So these are the different 7 layers. Data is like a data encryption in blob storage. So the principle is like an integrity. Application is like an SSL, and TSL, transport layer security encryption. It's like a regular application of for the integrity purpose. Compute is like an OS and layer software patches, which is like an availability basis. And the network security rules is like an completely and distributed. It's a confidentiality basis. Perimeter is a denial of service. So DDoS, it's an availability, and then identity and access is the Azure Active Directory user authentication, as we have discussed today. It's an integrity basis. And physical security, data sensor, biometric access control, and all. So door locks, key cards, those are again considered as like in principle is like in confidentiality. So All these 7 layers: data, application, compute, network, perimeter, identity, access, and this physical security. All these things will be considered as like it's a separate layers as security layers for the secured way of a data access, and for the secured manner to make sure that every customer will get the data security and uh, the data breach won't happen. So for all the 7 layers, you can see this is like an defense in depth. So the multi-factor authentication, identity and access, application, data security, network security, threat protection, the security management pillars. So this completes our complete module 2. So to like an in that management and governance that we are going to discuss. So the module 3. So Azure management and governance will cover the 30 to 35% of the weightage. So it contain like in cost management, as we have discussed multiple resources, how the cost management will be taken care, and the features of the tools and the Azure governance and the compliance, and the tools for the managing and deploying the Azure resources, and monitoring some of the monitoring tools in the Azure. So all that we are going to discuss on the tomorrow session. So for today, we are discussing a lot with respect to the module 2. We have discussed yeah, we have discussed the architecture, the complete Azure architecture and the services, which again it covers like in 35 to 40% of the weightage. Azure architecture components in the Azure, and the compute and the networking services, and the Azure storage services, and the identity and the access security part. So cool. Today I have like this much. So tomorrow we can sync up at the same time. So tomorrow again at the let's sync up at the 6 p.m. So at 6 p.m. we are going to discuss in detail about module 3. Thank you all for today.